Okay, so for the last of this series on introducing multi-channel EXR files and breaking out our AOVs from one data set as opposed to multiple files, I just wanted to go into how to graft this into the setup that we've already got. So as we know, the final version of the car is what we have plugged in here, which still exists, by the way. If I plug this car grade right back into the master, by default, it's just going to grab the RGB data, which is what we had all along. And then if I take the final merge node from the original comp and plug it back into the viewer, it's going to look exactly the same as it did. Now I can also just unplug that. I can plug individually each of these things into the viewer by themselves, but on their own, they're all incomplete. If I comp just the indirect diffuse, the car is going to look too bright. If I comp just the direct diffuse, it'll look okay, but it's got no gloss or shine anymore because it's just a matte paint. If I put the gloss and shine in, half the car is going to be missing because all the glossy data was on the chassis of the body of the car, so the wheels and the wings should have it. Looks like I've made a mistake in the render there. But yeah, that data is missing. So we need to essentially build the master version of the car from our individual pieces. We don't need depth for this example, so I'm just going to get rid of that shuffle node and just keep it simpler. So what we've got to do is pre-merge this data together to make a version of the car that is composed of these three nodes as opposed to just extracting it directly from here. And the reason why we want to do that is because, again, it gives us the ultimate control. We can adjust, if we got the specular separately, we can adjust the specular independently of the other layers. And that's the goal, and that's why we want to use this in the first place. We can't do that if we use this one. The specular is baked into the render. The only way I could change specular would be to go back to Maya and render the whole thing again, which if it's a a few thousand frames animation sequence, that could take hours and if not days. So anytime you can avoid re-rendering in 3D, it's to your advantage. So luckily we've already done what we need to do. We've already done it before here, and we've already learned how. We've got to merge this stuff together before we plug it into the final comp. So we've got merge nodes here that we used to add the shadow to the background, the car to the shadow and the background, and then we kind of put the cherry on top by adding the ambient occlusion on top. So we use 3 merge nodes to do that. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to merge the car so that it as a whole exists before we plug it into the other parts of the file. So let's just worry about that as its own problem first. And that's how I like to keep Nuke simple, is kind of worry about it one problem at a time. So I want to build the car so that the car only is functional, which I don't have right now. I've got 3 parts of it. So I already told you we're going to need a merge node to do it. So M is the hotkey for merge. And in all honesty, it really doesn't matter where you start with this. You're going to merge all 3. However, I prefer, just from my own personal preference, I like to start with diffuse as the bottom, and then the diffuse direct as the bottom, and then add the other layers on top of that. So I'm just going to move these around just to visually, again, mimic Photoshop's layer order. So we've got the bottom layer, the second layer, and the third layer. The reason I choose diffuse as the direct diffuse as my kind of master is because it's the most complete of the 3. It has the most data visually. It's got the entire car, but it's missing the other elements. This is so dark you can barely see it, and this doesn't have the entire car. It only has the specular layers. So I start with this just because it has all the visual data I need. It honestly doesn't matter. You could start with any of them. Once you've got them all merged properly, it's going to look exactly the same. So the order you plug these in really, truly doesn't matter. So just keep that in mind. So let's just start with this one first and build it from there. We're going to need 2 merge nodes to pull this off, because we're going to need to do the first merge to get started, and then we're going to have to merge the final node into that one. So we'll start with the background, or what I've decided is a diffuse D. So I'm going to plug the primary layer, the first layer, into B, because if you remember, it's always A over B. So I'm going to merge the indirect diffuse on top of the direct diffuse. So that's going to be A. Now I'm going to plug this into the viewer, because again, you do not see the result of the merge by default. You only see the result of the merge if you plug it into the viewer. So I selected the merge and hit the 1 key so I can see it. And you can see what's happening is the indirect information is completely covering the direct. They're not blending together at all. It's just the one is covering over the other. That's not what I want. That's because the default blend mode is set to over, which is not the one that I need for this situation. So I'm going to double click on my merge. First thing I'm going to do is label it. So I'm going to call it, again, be as descriptive as possible. So this one I will shorten the names a little bit because it's obvious what's connected to it. So I'm going to call this one DI, so diffuse indirect. Underscore DD underscore merge. So it's the diffuse indirect over diffuse direct merge. So it's a merge operation. And then the most important part is the operation itself. Over is not what we use in this situation. When it comes to this type of blending, what we want to use is plus or add. I think Photoshop might call it add. And what plus does is it just mathematically takes the pixels of this layer and adds the pixel data from this layer, combining both of them together. So now I've got the best of both worlds. I've got the indirect diffuse on top of the direct diffuse. The merge, by the way, we didn't do this in the previous examples, but merge also has this node function, so you can turn on the postage stamp if you want. So if you want to see a thumbnail for that, for a merge, you can do that as well. You could do that with these if you wanted to. Again, if you're a visual person and you like to see the thumbnail, that's how you always turn it on. You go to node and turn on the postage stamp. By the way, this second value here determines which frame you're showing. So obviously we've only got one frame right now, but if this was an animation, if you wanted to show a specific frame number in your postage stamp, you would just select the frame number here and it would load that frame automatically. I'm going to add another merge because we need to still add the specular to the equation here. And when it comes to merging multiple, generally speaking, you always want to merge or take the B pipe and plug it into the last merge, whatever that was. So I'm going to plug that straight down. So that's going to be B. The previous merge was the B. And A is going to be obviously my specular because that's all I've got left. I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to call this one spec to D or diffuse merge. And same thing as before, I need plus as my blending mode. So I'm going to double click on it, go to the drop down, choose plus, and you'll see nothing happened here again. I'm hoping most of you have noticed that I have not plugged this new merge into the viewer yet. I've still got the old merge plugged into the viewer, as you can see by this dashed line here. So I've got to update my viewer by selecting the new merge and hitting 1. And there it is, there's the specular. If I want to add the thumbnail, I can do it. Turn the postage stamp on, there it is. What I generally do for me is once I've got it working, I'll take the one that represents the car, which is the final merge. So this is now our car. This is the one that gets plugged into the equation. What I like to do is turn the thumbnails off for everything else. So I'm going to go in and turn the postage stamp off. Oops, chose the wrong one there. I'll fix that in a second. So I'm just going to double click on each of these. Taking a sluggish for some reason. and turn this one on. So I know now when I look at it that this is the node that I'm going to be using in the car setup, not any of the other ones. These were used to create this. And you can rearrange your graph, whatever makes sense to you as far as how things are lined up. This honestly doesn't matter as long as you can, as long as you know which is the master node. In this case, it's this one. Another thing you can do, which is a great little tool, is you can create a backdrop. And what a backdrop does is it allows you to kind of almost group these together with a new node that you can even add descriptions to. So for a backdrop, if you hit tab, type in back, and backdrop should be at the top. And where did my backdrop? Oh, here it is. It's over here. It's going to grab the backdrop. And the way backdrops work is you literally put it behind a group of nodes. And then once you do that, the nodes stick to it, as you can see. So if you want to reposition it, you might have to... There we go. So I'm going to call this backdrop node car only. And you can even give it a layer, and you can make notes to people. So where it says label here, I'm going to say use node with thumbnail in comp. And you can see that appears there. So if you're building a file for others to use, you can kind of build instructions into the backdrop, which is great. You can add notes to other nodes as well, but this backdrop function is a good way to do it. So then I know if I've set it up properly, there's only one node with a thumbnail, so this is the one I need to plug into the comp. Simple as that. So now if I go back to the original comp, I'm going to select the AO merge, which is our original final node, plug that into the viewer. But the car is missing because I unplugged it. So now I should be able to plug my car grade that I had earlier, which was originally plugged into the master right here. I'm going to instead plug that into my diffuse merge. And you can see I get the exact same thing. But the difference is now if someone comes to me and says, "Oh, it's too shiny. Specular's too strong." All I had to do is go to my specular merge, which is this one right here. Double click on it, and I can play with the mix value, which will turn the specular down. Again, with this version, the original, I wouldn't be able to do that in Nuke. I would have to go to Maya to do that. And that's why multi-channel EXRs are an advantage and useful. So for our final Nuke project, which would be assignment 2, this is more or less what I'm expecting from you guys. I'm expecting the car to be kind of composited by itself first using shuffle nodes and a multi-channel EXR file, and then 2 merge nodes to pull it together. I shouldn't say 2 merge nodes. It depends on how many shuffles you have. If you also have other layers like transmission, for example, if you have a transparency, then or an emission, if you have a material that glows somehow, then you would need to merge those as well. So you will have more merge nodes the more shuffles you have. Essentially, however many shuffles you have, you'll always have 1 less merge node. So if I had 6 shuffle nodes, I would have 5 merge nodes to build it. If I had 4 shuffle nodes, I would have 3 merge nodes to build it. So that relationship is always true. And then the rest of what happens here is all valid. So the grade, the desaturation, the blurs, everything that I did before is 100% still in effect and affects now the culmination of this comp as opposed to just the original car. And it's kind of what you can almost consider it. Each of these are almost their own composition. This composition works all by itself to build the car, and then I use the result of that composition to add the car to the universe when it boils down to it. And if you think modularly like that, even more complex compositions would be approached the same way. You'd build the individual assets and do everything you need to do with those by themselves first to make sure that they work individually, and then once you get that done on its own, then you add the result of that into your main comp. If any of you guys have ever used or done any tutorials in After Effects, this would be the equivalent of a pre-comp when it boils down to it. Okay, I'm going to stop this video here. This is pretty much the end of this multi-channel EXR series. And again, this is an example of what your final comp could look like. At the very least, the merge nodes should be the same for everybody. Where is going to be different from student to student is the color corrections and the blurs and those types of things, because those are going to be different from shot to shot regardless of the output and the subject matter.